Collective Awakening podcast,
sharing truth and knowledge in this time of conscious awakening
with Chris and Stephen. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Collective Awakening podcast. My absolute pleasure to welcome our very good friend and guest, Rob Tweddie Spiritual Medium. And so we're going to be welcoming him back for another great episode here. We have done many demonstrations, myself and Stephen, with Rob. We've done many podcasts over the years. So once again, we're going to be sharing some truth and knowledge in hope to inspire and resonate with all our listeners, all of you that are hopefully watching or listening to us right now. So welcome back, Rob. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. It's lovely, lovely to be here. Lovely to be in this energy, and great to be here.
Me and Rob have just had a really good catch up for about half an hour or so, and we've just done it's the podcast before the podcast.
Yeah.
we're going to try and incorporate, because what I always find with yourself, Rob, and there are others who we connect with, and this is the flow of energy, where when we connect, we have things in our thoughts that are very similar and things we're experiencing. So this is coming back to the importance of coming together this way with like-minded people and sharing. So we're not on our own in our thoughts at all.
100%. It's interesting you saying that, because I was thinking the same thing, and slightly, it's very interesting, but in a self-indulgent way, it's very good for us. It's good. The things you say are things that I've thought, or then the things that I say are things that have happened to you. And just even that sort of be a little bit of sort of reassurance that it's not just you, because as a medium, it can be quite solitary. Although you are connecting with people and on the surface, you're with people all the time. The actual journey yourself, the experience yourself, is quite sort of solitary. And so when I speak to somebody like you, who has had so many experiences, and you experience things now the same as I do, it's massively comforting. Actually, it's a really nice sort of thing. And we will probably talk about practical things, which say if you went to I don't know, like a development class at a church or something like that, they don't cover those things that they maybe teach how to present things and things like that, but they don't cover the day-to-day feelings that we get and the drain on our energy and those types of things, which are so important. They're not a thing which is taught in a way, you know.
Yeah, they gained from experiences, and really being able to share those experiences completely open, and know that you're not going to be labeled as anything, which is really important. And that's something you could do with, like-minded and open-minded people in having those discussions. And then what you find is, when, say, for example, you might say it, Rob, and that'll open something in me, go, yeah, I felt the same as well. And I know I'm safe to say so now, because we've opened up the conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And things, as I say, that don't get discussed, which are slightly unique to what we do. There's very few, if you like, professions or jobs where we are so much sort of giving of energy and entering energy so much that we're sort of bombarded by it. There's very few situations for people that get that, and we get it on a sort of almost a daily basis, and it does have an effect on us, and it has an effect on our own psyche in that way,
100%. Something I just want to mention for everybody listening or watching before we go any further is we have done lots of podcasts with Rob, a couple in person last year, full of some wonderful information, insights and experiences. So if you haven't watched them before, please check back and watch them. They're well worth a watch. But I feel that's a great place to start, actually, Rob, because we've spoke to you before about your own development and what you'd advise, but actually talking about the energies of giving, but also the energies of receiving and the importance 100%. Of that.
Yeah. And when people are on sort of mediumship courses, when they're being mentored and things like that, it's my experience that there is a big emphasis on making that connection, interpreting what spirits say, and that type of thing. And then there may be an emphasis on how you present it and how you relate to the person receiving the information. Both of those are very important. But what the emphasis seems to be a little is about your own well-being, and a really beautiful connection with the spirit world depends on three things, but three things all working well. One is that the ability of the person in the spirit world, and that can vary, the ability of the person in the spirit world to change their vibrational energy and to connect with us. So how good they are at it is a big influence. Also, the person receiving the message, the recipient, has to be responsive to it. You're never going to get anywhere if they literally are just completely negative about it. It's going to be it's very one-sided. So they need to, for the flow of that energy, they need to be receptive to it and to understand it. But what doesn't get talked about is the person in between, the medium, and their well-being. And there's just no doubt about it that if you're well in a good place yourself and physically okay, the connections are much easier to do and they're much stronger. There's no doubt about that. And I'm sure you've had situations where we've not felt great and we've struggled through a service or reading or something. And afterwards, it's interesting, we've talked about this in the past, because afterwards you sort of think, maybe I shouldn't have been doing that at this time. And trusting the way you feel, and it's an important part of the triangle of the connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it completely makes sense, and I'm certainly hoping. I know we've actually set out to do a weekend mediumship course at the Purple Mountain, and I've not done anything like that in a long while. And part of the reason was because sometimes there could be too much eagerness to get to the end result. And actually, what I'm incorporating into this weekend is self-care and acknowledging your feelings and your well-being. That is so important. And really, if you have a good hold on who you are, your own health and well-being, the rest will come quite simply. I believe.
And you're absolutely right. And we've mentioned this before, but history proves this as well. And I've been over the sort of Christmas time, I've had a bit of time. I've indulged in a few books and things, which I love. I don't get the time to do it. And I've sort of been looking back at the history of mediumship and the physical mediumship and the meeting in underground rooms in London and things like this, but one theme that really struck me was a lot of the more well-known sort of physical mediums, right? They had very short lives. It was well documented that they were ill a lot. A lot of them had these respiratory problems and all these types of things. And there's a very common theme with it. And in actual fact, almost everybody that I've studied, right, has either a short life or a long illness, So and in those days they did it very full on. They weren't aware of any of this, and were not really aware of their own well-being. They just went and gave out these demonstrations. So I think that sort of education for us now is so important for our own sort of well-being, And I found as well. This last year for me, for some reason or other, was incredibly busy, and I was aware that I was doing stuff every single day, and I was almost living on adrenaline and just working, And then at Christmas, I took 2 weeks out over Christmas for sort of grounding work, and it was Christmas is a good time to be off anyway, family and stuff like that. But honestly, Chris, it was such a valuable time. I had and I learned the value occasionally of doing nothing, and I realized that I was in a mindset, right, where I don't know if you're the same, but I almost felt I needed to achieve something every day. I've got to do a reading every day, or I've got to do some connection or a broadcast or something every single day. And I was in this sort of mindset. And actually, for the first time for quite some time, I actually had a little bit of time. I was able to read a book. I was able to sit and listen to some music and stuff like that. And suddenly the time doing nothing and spending some time alone, like what they call positive solitude, so spending some time alone, was incredibly valuable, probably more valuable than all the practice, all the sort of learning. It was very sort of therapeutic. So I extended it, and I went out into the country. I connected with nature. I really had a big regrounding, and it's revitalized me, and I must have needed it. And it wasn't until I was sort of that I did that I realized, looking back, gosh, I was under quite a lot of pressure, and you sort of just cope with it, don't you?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of I feel it's not only a rite of passage in this work, but in life as well. This
Absolutely.
obligation, this
Yeah.
feeling. I mean, I meet people all the time when we've done sound baths here, for example, and we have a moment when we do some breath work and we just sit in the silence for a few minutes at the beginning. And I ask people, when's the last time you just sat and you were just being?
Absolutely.
You were not waiting for your phone to ring. The telly wasn't on in the background, and it's almost like this thing of we've got to be doing something. If there's a gap in the diary, it's got to be full. And
Yeah.
and I've learned on my journey that a step back is actually a step forward in the end. So just
100%. Yeah.
don't be afraid to take a step back. You need it, but it can be hard. It could be a little bit like you're a hamster on a wheel trying to jump off.
Yeah. And we get a sort of almost a human conditioning for a lot of people, where they go for a long time when they can't switch their mind off, and you'll get all the people who toss and turn at night because they say, I can't switch my mind off, and maybe they'll even go to the doctors and ask for things to try and help and stuff. And one of the things is, like, for example, you get a lot of people who they need to go to sleep listening to the telly or listening to music, or because they can't be in their own thoughts. They need a distraction. So whether it's like the news on, or they like to they set the telly to turn off after an hour so that they can listen to it as they're going to sleep. Those types of things. And they're a symptom of the way we are, and we get that way where we're so conditioned that we don't allow ourselves that sort of time. And actually, although this is slightly controversial, one of the biggest benefits of meditation is not necessarily the act of meditation. It's more the fact of giving yourself that time. It's time very valuable. If you just sat there and did nothing for half an hour, right, that's actually very therapeutic in itself. And so what you say is quite right. So the sound bath experience is lovely because I love the vibrational energy of a sound bath. So yeah, that's great, and that's a bonus. But the actual taking that time for themselves out of the day or the week or the year, that is equally therapeutic in itself, but we feel that sort of we live life, don't we, to the watch, to the sort of what we've got to do, and constantly feeling that we've got to achieve something, but actually if you build in the times when you're not, or a little bit of time when you're doing nothing, they are massive. They're as valuable as the time when you're achieving something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I agree what you mentioned about meditation. For me, meditation in its simplest form is just sitting in the silence. And I'll
Absolutely.
say to people sometime in readings, they'll say, oh, no, I can't meditate. And I said, well, just sit, light a nice candle and just sit in a comfortable chair. You don't even have to close your eyes if you don't want, but just sit. And it's just sitting in the silence and allowing that time, almost allowing yourself to catch up with yourself. And maybe this is part of, hence the sort of podcast Collective Awakening, but part of that awakening process in the world of breaking away from that belief system that we always should be doing something. Because
Absolutely.
if you think our ancestors would, they'd lie and look at the stars at night, and they'd take time for nature, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And people do acknowledge it because they talk about things like, oh, he's got a work ethic, or he's a grafter, and these are people that sort of continuously occupying themselves from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night. Chris, I'd love to share a little tiny exercise with people who are watching, which will really help with this. If this resonates,
please do.
Go for it. Listening, and they sort of think, they're talking a bit about me here. There's a very, very good first aid for our own psyche, a sort of grounding thing, and it only takes 2 minutes. So what this is my guidance for, and it's very good for everybody. I do it regularly. What the way to do it is pick a day, say tomorrow, right? And in the day, right, just at some point in the day when it's safe to do it, is just stop what you're doing. Just stop what you're doing, wherever you are. If you're in a park, if you're in the car or whatever, or pull over, or if you're at home or whatever, just stop what you're doing, right? And then for only 1 or 2 minutes, clear your mind, and then absolutely fill yourself with everything that's around you. So if you're in a park, you would start looking at the grass, you'd look at the temperature and the smells, and can you see anybody, what's the sky like, in every single detail. In 1 or 2 minutes, you can get an amazing amount of information, right? But really concentrate on it, on the here and now, on how do you feel, and have you been here before, and and everything about the moment that you're in, right? So do that for once, for 2 minutes or a minute, and then the next day do the same thing again in a different place, okay? And it's a first aid. Well, one thing is it forces us to switch our minds off and then into the here and now. And so much of the time, we have experiences, Chris, where we are, we're not experiencing the thing at the time. We're already thinking about what am I having for tea, or what am I doing tonight, And so we're actually missing the experience that we're in at the moment. And it's massively therapeutic, because actually being in the here and now for a time can be beautiful, because where you are, say, example, in a park, right? Actually, that experience of that minute there in the park and having a minute to yourself like that in itself is a lovely experience, probably more important than the thing you're thinking about that you're going to do later. So it's a first aid for getting us into the here and now. It's also a very good exercise for people who find it difficult to meditate. If you find it difficult because your mind just completely wanders all the time, let your mind wander, but control it, and fill it with everything that's around you, okay? And even going extending to how you feel, and how does the place make you feel? Oh, I love it here, or no, I don't like it here, or those types of things. You go into all the emotion of it as well, and the more detail and the more what they call immersive that you can be with it, the better. And it's a massive little tip for you. So I'll just pass that on to people.
Yeah, incredible. I'm sure that'll be really useful for everybody that's listening. And actually, it's just bringing us into the moment. Like you said, we're thinking of the next thing all the time, and later on, tomorrow, or even yesterday. And in that moment, we could be missing things.
We're missing the actual experience that sometimes we're craving, and it's right there and then, and if you're not careful, and I've done this this is not me sort of lecturing, I've done this myself, you can find when you analyze things that you almost spend your entire life waiting for things, not experiencing the thing now. And you even get it, people sort of say, oh, if I just had a better job, I'd be happy, or if I just moved house, or got a new car, or had £1,000 in my bank or something, that would make me happy, And actually the proof is, when you get the £1,000 in the bank, or you get the new car, or the holiday, or whatever it is, actually that's not the end result. Then you need something else, and we can sort of almost put our happiness dependent on things happening, and actually that's not great, because you miss the whole section as it leads up to it, and so having our happiness and things depending on things that we think are going to happen is not good. You need to be in the here and now and experiencing it now,
Yeah, I call it I'll be happy when.
Yeah,
I'll be
absolutely.
happy. I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when. And it's like, you can be happy now, really.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I know this is slightly deep, but it's the happiness is within us. It's within us all the time anyway, So you can have something which you can have, if it was really extreme, you could have a situation where you would win a prize somewhere, right? Say you won a car or something. You would think to yourself, that moment will be incredibly happy and make me incredibly happy. But actually, the moment that you maybe woke up in the morning and felt wonderful, or the sun was shining, or you sort of you had a lovely meal or something, it's not proportionate. The level of happiness and contentment can be equal or can be more for the thing which seems trivial. Can you follow that? It's it's not
absolutely.
It doesn't, it's not particularly proportionate. The level of contentment that we get, say if we were in a competition competition, the difference between winning £1,000 or £10,000, you think will be, much more life-changing and make a big difference. But actually, the contentment and the joy of winning there is the same. There isn't a sort of level of it, if that makes sense. Where I'm not talking about immediate reaction. It's a contentment. What gives you the contentment? If that makes sense. Yeah.
100%. So I feel that's some really sort of good advisement, and even just talking about these subjects, opening them up. Not just if you're in any form of spiritual work, but in life, and then that's so
100%.
true.
Yeah.
We hear it all the time, and I've probably said it many times in the past, to be honest. I'll be happy when and then when that thing comes, actually, you've still got that same feeling that resurfaces again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's something within you.
And it's a sort of human mindset that we've got. And believe it or not, it's actually in other cultures as well. It's not just not a sort of United Kingdom or American type culture. It's throughout the world. We sort of, it's very obvious when we analyze it, because we're very good, right, as humans, and in our culture, about sort of moaning about things, right? And we probably moan, right, and complain, right? The weather's bad, it's cold, isn't it? I'm a bit hungry. Oh, look at the price of the fuel, and all these things, right? And each individual thing is probably totally justified, right? But when we verbalize and we talk to people, right, I would say, this is not exaggeration, for every 100 complaints we make, right, because it's an easy conversation for us, because it just flows, and we for every sort of thing that we're negative about, we probably only ever throw in one thing that's positive. It's very rare that somebody comes up to you and says, I've had the most brilliant day, and it does happen occasionally, but it's the majority of conversations with strangers and things like that are all to moan about it. Oh yeah, well, I've been waiting here for 20 minutes to see the doctor, or I've been waiting here. The conversations we have with people are very generally negative. It's slightly unusual if somebody just is equally positive, if that makes sense.
And it taps into something, actually. Another friend of ours, Jenny Moore, a medium, she mentioned something at the beginning of a demonstration, which is, in this time we're living in, we really need to lift our vibrations and our own vibrations.
We do.
And I'm not talking about false positivity we were forcing ourselves, but bringing that laughter in, bringing that happiness.
Yeah.
And bringing it forward, trying to almost like lifting the weights off your shoulders.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things I do when I have a clairvoyant connection with somebody in the spirit world, and if it's a nice connection and I'm sort of feeling comfortable with it, trusting the person in the spirit world, one of the questions I often ask, because it's a very good way of exploring things, is I say to them, have you any regrets that you want to say now? Now's your chance to say it. If you anything you would look back on, you'd do differently if you could change the clock back. Sometimes they'll say no. I'd do it all over again, and that's fine, right? But one of the big things that people say, there's 2 or 3 things. Quite often people will have regrets over certain things they've done, but they quite a lot of people, when you ask that question, then they say yes, it's to do with appreciating things at the time, and then they say I'd give anything to be back there, and I'd appreciate it, and at the time I took it for granted, and it can be the most simple thing. It can be just for sitting and watching a film on the TV with a wife, that type of thing, the most sort of it's not the dramatic memories like childbirth and things like that. It's just those little things that they didn't appreciate, and when they're in the spirit world and the energy there, it's a completely different experience, and they look back on it and think, I wish I'd appreciated that, and I get that quite a lot.
Yeah, I could really resonate with that, and something that I know was important that you wanted to touch on, Rob, and I find it an important subject at this moment in time, the subject of grief. Now, I don't think this gets discussed enough, particularly in spiritual circles and such, openly.
I agree.
And we had a wonderful discussion. It was actually on one of our trance nights, when we had a cup of tea after in the group. It was a small group, and we ended up having this chat where people were just opening up about the stories and the journey. And I was thinking about this morning as we prepared for this conversation. I was like, Will most people find themselves to reaching out to mediums for readings through grief?
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree that it's something that's not discussed. That element of it, and we're very lucky as as mediums, because we have almost both sides of it. We have an insight of what's happening in the spirit world as well, and they have a different perspective on things, and it's a very good thing to discuss. And bizarrely, what we do as mediums, we become experts on grief, on the practical way that people grieve and the practical way that they feel, because we deal with it all the time. We probably deal with bereavement, probably only maybe undertakers, maybe similar, but we sort of only come
Yeah,
across
very true.
bereavement, yeah, more than almost anybody, any other profession in any way. So we become very familiar with it. We've become very seeing all the different manifestations of it. So yeah, I'd love to just talk through some of the things that I've picked up to help people.
Yeah, please do.
The first thing that is very important to say is that people, there's no right or wrong about it. There's no we impose things on ourselves. There are sections of people who they seem to be able to deal with grief very effectively, and that's fine. But then they'll come to me and they'll say, I never cried. I never, I was so close to my mum, but I never cried. And I say, well, that's fine. That's okay. So there's not, don't have a self-imposed view of what grief should be. That's the first thing. Okay. Now there's another thing where if you lose somebody who's very close to you, who you really love, that's probably one of the most traumatic things you could go through in your life, right? And we all go through a stage with that where we feel, especially if it's a really close loved one, we feel that we will never be happy again. We feel as if it's just not possible. Life is never going to be the same again, okay? It's a very natural feeling and part of the sort of grieving process that we go through. But what I've picked up, and it's and I get this very much from the spirit world, right? They, in the spirit world, they want to watch us being happy, right? And it doesn't matter what we do afterwards, they want us to be happy. So when they're watching things, they don't want us to be upset and crying and things, because it makes them feel helpless. They can't help us, right? But people, as once we've got over the initial sort of the first period of losing somebody, and we're sort of, things are starting to get back to normal more, right? That's sometimes the toughest time, because almost a reality sets in when we're preoccupied with getting over it and telling people and making arrangements and things like that. That almost sort of puts off the reality check, and it's after everybody's gone and after maybe the funeral and stuff like that, that suddenly you're facing a life without that person, and it's a big sort of reality check. But what I would say to people is we some of us feel that, this is quite important to say this, that we have to be sad and we have to grieve, and we feel if we had a moment in amongst all this of being happy, something nice happens, right? We almost feel like it's being disloyal to the person in the spirit world, as if I can't let myself be happy because that's finally letting go, right? And it's a human feeling, and we have a need to feel sad about it, because it feels like that's not ended. Then we're still holding on to that, because we're holding on to that grief. If we let that grief go and we get things that come into our life which make us happy, it feels almost disloyal, and it's a strange psychological thing that happens. But actually we don't need to feel that way at all. And my guidance, and I get it from the other side of, obviously, but is to move forward with our lives, but bring that person with you, bring them with you. And the things to do on a practical basis are just, and I get this all the time, the people, and I'm sure you do, Chris, the people who sort of, they chat to the photograph, they'll go to church, and they have their sort of thoughts, they send their thoughts out to their loved ones, and they include them. And when I do connections for readings and things like that with people who do that, the connections are gorgeous. And when the person in the person in the spirit world, very often they'll say to me, I just love it because I feel like I'm still there, I'm still part of it, you know. And almost the more casual that we bring the person with us. So if you've got a photograph of your loved one, you know, as you go past it, sort of just chat it, you know, I'll be back in 10 minutes, you know, that type of thing, right? People think, people come to me and say, I'm talking to this photograph, am I going mad? And I say, no, you're not. You're doing a wonderful thing, because it's keeping that person, almost keeping their spirit going with you, you know. And I see it from the other side, because readings, when people do that, I've often said to people, this reading's been down to you, because you've kept him close to you or her close to you, and it's a beautiful thing. So my message with that is to move forward, but take the person with you. No, don't expect life to you know, I don't believe that time's a healer. I think for some losses, time doesn't heal particularly. It makes us maybe have a perspective and deal with things, but it doesn't heal. But then, but bringing the person with us, we can move forward. We can move forward and take them on the adventure with you, you know, and that's very much the way. And in the spirit world, that's what they love. They love that, you know. And when they come through and they say, oh, we've seen her, you know, she's been back out dancing again, you know, they're filled with pride with it, you know. So that's my kind of message with that it's not disloyal to be happy at times. I'm not saying you won't get the sad moments. You'll probably get them for the rest of your life. Odd days where it hits you, you know, and things like birthdays, Christmas, things like that. But it's not disloyal, and it's not leaving the person behind for you to carry on with your life. It isn't.
I think that's a very important point there. What can come up during the grieving process, and an obligation, feelings of what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing. I mean, I spoke to a lady a few weeks ago, and when she lost her husband, and she had 2 young children at the time, and people were sort of talking about her in her community, saying, oh, she's very hard and she's very this, and she doesn't cry. And she said, what they didn't see is it took all my energy to get up in the morning and look after my 2 sons and keep life going. And she said that had to be where my energy was at that time.
Absolutely. And Chris, and it has a very a different the sort of grieving process is very well documented, and the different stages we go through for anger and denial and things like this. It's very well sort of documented, but there's other stuff which only maybe we encounter where we see it in people, and when you lose somebody close to you, it makes you feel very vulnerable in a simple way as well. It makes you think about your own mortality and things that we don't normally think about. We do as mediums, but generally people don't think about those things. And then suddenly it makes you feel kind of vulnerable. And then you've maybe got the practical stuff where you know there's maybe things to organize, and then you're starting to well, am I got other worries now, and what would I live, where do I live, and what do I do, and those types of things. And these are all part of that sort of process, but they're difficult things, and we have to kind of work through those as well, as just literally missing the person, you know.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head using that word process. It's a process of what it needs to be for you. You know, we could almost tap into what was said at the beginning about self-care and such, and if we need to step back from anything. But it did make me smile when you mentioned about talking to the photograph, because so many times in readings, I've even picked up people's loved ones, and they say, you're talking to that photograph, or you were giving me a good telling off the other night, you're still telling me off, and I'm in spirit.
And I find that in the spirit world, they love that, you know. I do it all the time. I some people call it self-talking and things like that, but I will connect with my loved ones in the spirit world all the time with what I'm doing, and I'll even say, am I doing the right thing here, you know, and sort of get a little bit of reassurance sort of thing. But it's beautiful, and I get it from the other side where they love that. So the people that have said that to you, I'm pretty sure they would have enjoyed the fact that they talked to the photograph, and people think, oh, I'm going mad, but it's strangely comforting, and it's comforting because it is making that connection. And in the spirit world, they love people doing things like that. It's sort of including them a bit of sort of normality is very good. Can I say another quick thing? It just makes me think of something here. When I have a connection with somebody in the spirit world, and we get through the sort of maybe the emotional things that need to be said, and if they want to say that they love the person or they miss the person or something like that. Once the person in the spirit world starts chatting about normal stuff, I just seen her go in the hairdressers, or memories, and just sort of chatting on a more sort of the basis maybe we would chat, that's a very good sign. It's a very good sign of normality, and it's a sign that in the spirit world they've sort of settled in a way. So if in a reading or a message or that type of thing, if they start then bringing in sort of trivial things that have happened or things they've been doing and things, it's a very good sign for the person in the spirit world. Also, just a very quick thing, the sort of sense of grieving in the spirit world for the person who's in spirit now, missing the person who's alive, is a different sort of set of difficulties that they have to deal with. And one part of it is, in the spirit world, when we become energy and we're free of the human emotion and we're free of the human body, it's the most amazing experience. It's just mind-blowingly amazing experience for us to think of as a human. Beyond it's what you think it would be times 10. It's just amazing, right? And I know this from years and years, right? But it's very difficult for somebody. This is a really interesting thing to tell you. It's very difficult for somebody in the spirit world, right, when they're talking to their loved one who's here, who's in floods of tears and missing them and having all sorts of regrets and things they wish they'd done and things like that. It's very difficult for the person in the spirit world to then start saying, but I know you're like this, but actually I'm having the most incredible time, and it's a different set of problems, because it is they don't have that same grief process in that way, but it's a different set of problems, because they wouldn't want to feel that they can say, well, look, I'm okay. They often say, I'm okay, but I want you to be okay. But it's a whole different way of things, because
I picked up that in similar ways in the past as well, where you'll have somebody come in for a reading and they're very concerned about the loved one in spirit, are they okay, etc. Where it's actually the reverse, where they're all right in spirit and they're really concerned about the person here.
Absolutely.
They're all right.
Yeah. And I get that a lot. And one of the first things people say when they come through is, tell them they don't need to worry about me. Don't worry about me. And they're then wanting to talk about the person on the who's alive. And I get that a lot, where I'll say, look, I'm trying to ask him things about himself, but actually all he wants to do is talk about you, which is fine, because their needs in that way are taken care of, and the emotion, the pure emotion of the grief, how it makes us feel, the chemical reactions in our body and things like that, are connected to the human body. They're a mortal thing, it's a different set of, they don't get the same sort of that, people describe like a hollow feeling or palpitations and all different extremes that people get when they're going through this grieving process. Those elements, they don't really get them in the spirit world. We're an energy, and we don't really get those. That it's a human condition. So it's a different set of sort of processes, and I've even had it to the extreme where I've had someone in the spirit world say, I've said, how's things, how are you, and they'll say, don't tell her this, but I'm fine, I'm absolutely wonderful, it's fantastic, I'm experiencing things I've never experienced, but they don't want me to say that to the person, because the person conditions want them to say, look, we're missing them, we're loving, we're and going through the same process that we're going through, but it is a different set of processes for them, so it's interesting.
100%. And as we sort of talk about this process and sort of receiving those messages, I don't know if what your thoughts are on this, Rob, and mine have changed over the years. When I first got involved in any sort of readings, and I wouldn't say it, but I would hear people say, at least 12 months before, after somebody's passing, before you go for a reading, and there was these types of things. And I've always been quite open-minded, so I thought, well, I'll just work with how people come to me. The less I know, the better. I'm sure you're the same. And I've actually found in recent years that what they'll do, people, when they pass the spirit is almost bob back very quick to say hello to everybody and I'm all right.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll go and sort out what they need to sort out and get adjusted. And then
Yeah.
maybe come back in a bit more depth later. So I've had people who have had a passing of a loved one a week after. And I've got it as clear as day, was said, say if it's someone's grandma, she's been round everybody.
Yeah.
She's bobbed in on
100%.
every single person. And I found that interesting, experiencing that myself.
Yeah, I get that 100%. I've done church services. I did one where people came or they were all wearing dark clothing, and they'd literally come from the funeral from the person who's passed, right? And I got the connection perfectly good. And I agree with you. I've had them come through, and the message is they actually say, tell them I've made it. Tell them I'm here.
Yeah.
And I have another one I've had is, and this was quite recently, where I didn't know at the time I was doing a reading for somebody, and the person was a medium I was doing a reading for. I didn't know, right? And their husband comes through, and he goes, "I've just got one big thing to say." So I've said, "Well, yeah, okay, tell me what it is, right?" And he goes, "Will you tell her she was right all along?" So yeah, and it's like a confirmation for them, So I've had that. I had that quite recently, and I said so that, and I sort of then worked it out. I said, "Well, are you very spiritual, or are you a medium yourself?" And she says, "Yeah, I am a medium." And he didn't believe you, did he? And she said, "No, he didn't." I said, "Well, he is now," and they've come through. But I do agree with you there, and they then need to sort of maybe they will come through initially with a reassurance in a way, and then maybe step back for a time, so while they're carrying on with their journey in the spirit world. Can I also tell you something else very interesting that I've come across as well? I don't know if you've experienced this, Chris, where I've had it happen in a reading, right, where a person who's very close, it was somebody's daughter, they died in hospital, went to the spirit world in hospital, and the daughter had just missed the passing, so she came about 10 minutes late. The hospital phoned, she's got there, but he'd already passed, right? The guy in the spirit world, the dad in the spirit world, says, she's feeling that she never got to say goodbye, right? So I said, okay, I get this, just wait a moment. So I said to her, do you have a feeling that you didn't get to say goodbye? And she said, yes. I was devastated. I'd always promised him that I would be there when that, we talked about it openly. He said, and when the time came, I will be there. And I couldn't get there. She was delayed and she couldn't get there in time, right? And the guy in the spirit world, as clear as day, was incredible reading. And the guy in the spirit world said, tell her she doesn't need to worry. She said, he said, I waited, and my spirit waited before it. So clinically he'd passed, and the doctors would no heartbeat and all the rest of it, right? But his spirit waited until she came. She saw her and then waited till she left the hospital, and then he carried on with his journey to the spirit world, and I thought it was beautiful. So he said, I waited because I knew you'd come, so I was able to say to the woman, you did the right thing to go there and see him, because he was waiting to say goodbye. You don't need to have that feeling, and he went with a happy feel, and it's been well documented. It's a similar thing to when you hear about people talking about they can see themselves being operated on and those types of things, where an astral projection, where the spirit's out of the body, but on their journey back to the spirit world, they can wait for a time, now, when I don't know if this is right or not, but when I've investigated this further, because I found it fascinating and it was so comforting, for that girl, it was fun. I said, well, and I was able to say, to do with, she'd knocked something over, like a vase of flowers. So I said, when you were there, you knocked over some flowers, didn't you? And she had, and it was so comforting. I said, well, he was watching, he's watching that. It was so comforting. When I have investigated this, researched this a bit further, because it's something fairly new to me, this part of it. I understand that the spirit can wait for quite some time, because there's been a documented thing where a similar thing to what I've just told you, but somebody had to fly from America, was coming home because the person was ill, but then they died a bit quicker, right? So and the spirit waited about 3 or 4 days before going to the spirit world. So it's an amazing thought, that they can sort of wait. It's not an immediate thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely incredible and incredibly comforting that
Oh,
that
yeah,
person
yeah,
can
yeah.
receive that information. The other thing I've a lot of in the past where actually some people will wait for somebody to leave the room before they pass.
100%. Yeah, yeah,
As well, that
yeah,
happens all the
yeah,
time, and the often what will come forward is, "Look, it was meant to happen that way. It happened the way it was meant to. They were
yes,
waiting for you. Oh, I
yeah,
just left that. I went to get a coffee downstairs in the hospital, and
yeah,
everything happened when I was gone."
yeah.
And
That
being
this
able to
I
pass
come across
forward
this
that
a lot.
reassurance.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, and can be done because the person who's passing doesn't want to upset that person. It
Yeah.
can be that they doesn't feel as if they would be able to deal with it and stuff like that. So yes, it does happen. I've got an interesting add-on to that as well. I've come across that quite a bit, and I always do this, Chris, because I'm learning all the time. And when I get something very interesting like that, and if they tell me I actually waited until she'd left, and sometimes I'll say, well, why did you do that? Right. But when I talk about with them, they describe that thing, right? It's really an unusual way, this, where they're there, right, maybe in a hospital bed or wherever it is, and their spirit is invited, right? This is the key, invited to leave the body, right? So
Yeah.
and to go back to the spirit world, but there's an invitation to do it. And so those people have sort of said, yes, could you just wait, and there's a sense that they have that choice over that small time, but all that time the person so they're sort of having a control over it, now I don't know how long that wait could be, but they talk about being invited, they're invited to leave the body. It's not like,
Interesting.
yeah, it's not like when you get sudden passing, and I can be aware that the spirit left the body very quickly or left traumatically, and those things happen, and it goes straight to the spirit world. But with that particular circumstance where there is a will to pass at a certain time for that reason, it seems like we almost have a choice over it, and it's amazing, so yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I've heard many times in the past is where the person passing will actually wait almost the loved ones will give them permission. It's all right to go.
yeah, absolutely,
Like
yeah,
that, like the holding on to obligation. I should be here, and they said
yeah,
to him, it's all right to go. It's all right to go, and they'll pass. It's almost like not that they need strictly permission, but they need the words help
yeah,
in
yeah,
in
yeah,
releasing any form of obligation, I suppose.
yeah,
That
yeah. There is, yeah, you. That is really, really good, and very much so. Very reassuring for the person. Sometimes the last thing that they hear, and if anybody ever is in that situation, one of the this is another thing I've talked about with them. But if anybody is ever in that situation, the key thing to say to the person or to get across is you'll never forget them. So it's and that's massive, and that saying that to them gives them that reassurance that they can go, and that seems to be the most important factor, even more important to the person taking their transition than sort of saying the things you think of, like maybe, oh, I do love you and things like that. Okay, that's a lovely outpouring, and okay, but to say that, yeah, I won't forget you, is
yeah,
massive to them, and it's almost like then that releases them, and it's a lovely thing. And also, I'm very in favour of people doing what you said there. Probably giving permissions, maybe not quite the right way to describe it, but the
yeah, I
effect of it,
agree.
yeah, is. But I'm very much in favour of it. It's massively comforting for that person.
And what comes to mind as well, Rob, is and I've sort of had this before from during readings. What's passed forward from spirit is those last moments don't define your entire connection and lifetime together.
Yeah,
A
yeah, I
lot of
know.
people define it by
Yeah,
that last 10 minutes, a
they
whole
do.
lifetime.
No, they do.
Uh,
100% they do. Yeah, yeah.
so
I,
that whoever's coming through will say, "Look at all these times we had. Look at all these experiences. I've rewatched them again in the spirit world. They were amazing."
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. And isn't it amazing when you get a connection? This is one of the things why having readings is a very good thing, very often, because we have a completely disproportionate thing. So something that the person tells you who's alive, who has massively regretted something. I should have bought that for him and never did it. The person in the spirit world, it's so trivial. It's a different sense of proportions. They don't they say, well, I didn't even remember it. Tell him not to worry. I couldn't even remember. I was rude to him at such and such a time, or never turned up somewhere. And the person in the spirit world saying, well, I don't even remember that. So our sense of what we hang on to and define that relationship can be quite far removed from the reality of it, or how the person in the spirit world sees it, and you're quite right. And they can define it on whether they were there when they passed, or whether they did hold their hand, or did they give them that kiss, and then sometimes they can even a huge sort of thing, which really just doesn't matter. They can define the whole way they've dealt with it and their self worth of the way they've dealt with it. Even things like arrangements, how the funeral, where they were laid to rest, where the ashes were. Whereas actually, when you analyze it, that's a massively human thing. In the spirit world, they don't really mind. You know what I mean? They like the fact that they're treated with dignity. They like the fact that people thought about them, right, which is lovely, right? But actually, the practicality of it's a human emotion. It's an emotion for us, not the person in the spirit world. They don't need that. They haven't got that body anymore. They don't need it.
I have had a couple of times though, Rob, where they've said like where ashes have been hung on to, and they're like, for goodness sake, will you do something with them ashes?
Yeah, I've had that as well. Yeah, I've 100% had that. Yeah, but it's a very sort of controversial subject in some ways with families, and it can, with different views and all that. And not always. I have had the odd one that has been specific about it or wants to be laid to rest with somebody, and I do get that. But the majority, when this has been going on in the family, and you say to the person in the spirit world, what do you want me to say? What's your view on it, right? They don't mind. They don't mind. They say, do whatever they want. They don't mind. So that's the vast majority. There are a couple of exceptions with that. I have had people where they seem to really, really want to be laid to rest with the person that the loved one. So I do get that.
And I've had other takes that are a little bit different as well. That's happened, where actually the person in spirit will come forward and say, no, it's fine, because they almost need it they need to keep them for them at the minute. They're not quite ready.
Yes.
So it's all right. Yeah. Don't push them. It's what's right for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had both ways round. Yeah, no, I've had that as well. 100%. Where they don't rush. Don't rush with them. And that's another little thing where we sort of put a bit of pressure on ourselves sometimes. We think, that needs to be. They're not properly laid to rest or something, or they're, we're not sure what to do. And it's not the case. So I had a very strange thing, Chris, and I'll just ask you if you've ever experienced this. There's this thing, right, about, and it's fairly common now, where people will maybe share the bits of the ashes. Somebody's cremated, they will share the ashes and maybe make something out of them, and those types of things, right?
Yeah, like jewelry and stuff.
Yeah. Up until fairly recently, whenever I've come across that, the person in the spirit world has been sort of quite pleased, and they'll talk about, they've got some, carry them around with me. I come across somebody who, believe it or not, had some ashes put into ink and then and a tattoo made. So it's a proper sort of carrying the person around, right? And generally speaking, I've found in the past that in the spirit world, they're quite happy with that. They feel okay with it. But I have had just very unusual two fairly recent ones where I've done readings for people, and I've said, and they were fairly recent passings, and I've said, this person in the spirit world wants to actually say something. I said, have you sorted out what's happening with the ashes yet? And they've said no, right? And the person in the spirit world doesn't want that, which is strange. So, and it's the first time in years that I've actually come across it, but it's happened twice recently where they've said, look, I want the ashes to stay together, and they've not given me a reason, but I've sort of have to respect it. And so I've just said, I say to the person, well, it's up to you what you feel, but I'm being told right now that actually they want the ashes to stay, so to not be split up. So, and I've never come across it before. So have you ever come across that?
No, I've but I know what you're sort of speaking of, and what comes to my thoughts with that is as well, I suppose we have to be aware of an over attachment to things as well, as a way of it sort of brings us back to the grieving process, where we can over attach to things that isn't healthy long term. Short term, it might be what's needed, But
Yeah.
perhaps that's where loved ones will come in and say,
Good
"Oh, they
point.
need a bit,
Yeah.
they need a bit of a push now.
Yeah.
This is going on," and it sort of ties in with what I wanted to mention in your thoughts, Rob, of like over the years, the way even funerals and such are conducted now is changing very much. The
Yes.
introduction of more modern music that is a favorite of the person, colors being worn at funerals instead of all wearing black. People are even mentioning the word celebration of life,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which I truly believe it should be celebrating everything that person is and
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
continues to be. So I'd be
Yeah.
interested to hear your thoughts on how that's
It's
changing as well. We're
it
progressing.
absolutely has. I think it's progressive, and I think that an amazing thing. I have a view that eventually, in many generations' time, it'll be even more. It will be for everybody, where dying and death and things like this and passing are not a taboo subject at all. They will just be
Yeah,
a natural part, like you would talk about old age. That's not a
yeah,
taboo subject. People can quite happy to talk about middle age or old age and things like that. In
yeah.
fact, they joke about it, though they are all getting old and things like this. And that's an accepted sort of thing. It's not something we can't talk about or we feel uncomfortable with, right? Even though you've got some uncertainties with old age, the same as the fear of passing is to do with is largely the unknown, because we don't, people who haven't got that knowledge or understanding, they feel it's a big unknown, and that's what's difficult. But then there is unknowns in old age as well. We don't know how we're going to be, or we don't know what it's going to feel like, and so there is an unknown, but it's not a taboo subject. So what you say there, it's a step towards where eventually I do believe that it will our dying and our passing and our going to a different place or a different form, right, will be absolutely as natural to us as old age is, or as being a child. It will be an extension, right? So I absolutely agree that the more sort of in a funeral, the more just normal if the person, if the person was very dour and very long-faced and everything, then okay, have a funeral like that. But if the person was a football fan, why not? Why not all wear football shirts? Why not wear colours? I absolutely, it's no something to do with being disrespectful. The person in the spirit will love that. And when I've had it, I believe it or not, I had a reading for somebody, and I said, "Oh, there's something been unusual in the funeral, wasn't there?" And they'd I will tell you, other chocolate bars are available, by the way, but they made the coffin. They made the coffin, right? Oh, you don't want to say that. They made the coffin, right, of and they painted it and stuff. They were art students, and they painted it all as a bar of dairy milk chocolate, right? And that was the coffin, right? And the person come through and was mentioning all this, right? And I said, "Well, why did they do that?" And the person said, "Well, I absolutely love chocolate, and they were always teasing me about it. I had to have a bar of chocolate with me, right?" And so they'd done that, right? And that is in no way disrespectful. And the person in the spirit world couldn't wait to say it was fantastic, and they said, "I watched every bit of it," and it said it looked good enough to eat and all this, and it was lovely. And how anybody could feel that that's not the right way to do it for that person, it just was, So the point being, the more that it becomes just a normality in that way, and not some sort of grandiose occasion where we feel like we've got to dress in a certain way or feel we've got to do certain things. I think just a reflection of their life and the way they were,
and it being authentic to them. That's what comes.
Absolutely.
Quite often I joke when I'm talking with Stephen actually, and I'll say, "Well, I hope when my time comes that nobody's there reading out like I'm a saint. I want the whole,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want the
absolutely.
whole
Yeah.
version of me when the true self.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's really important. It's certainly important to me. You
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's I do believe though that we will reach that point sometime in the future where everybody will have much more of an insight into it, the way we've got insight into stages in our lives now, right?
I do too.
Yeah,
I think it's going that way already.
it
I
is.
really agree with you that, and I
Yeah,
think it's just a natural coming out of death being a taboo,
yeah.
more and more and more.
And
Probably
Chris, it's
part of the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is becoming much more mainstream, and even in our everyday language. Because if say now, almost everybody you speak to in this country, if you just said, "Oh, my uncle's just passed," right? They would know what that means. Nearly everybody, right? Very
Yeah.
few wouldn't know what that means. It's a common term for somebody that dies, right? But the actual meaning of it means they've passed. They've passed into the spirit world. They've passed into another dimension, another energy. And so it's a very spiritual way of looking at it. But people, it's in everyday language. It's they and it's becoming almost accepted without sort of realizing it. And it's so interesting, Chris, because people talk about without in common day language. He's in very high spirits now, right? Well, high spirits, yeah, because that somebody's happy. It's because their spirit is happy, and we and people would talk about something. I was a spirited performance by that boxer or whatever. Actually, what they're actually saying is their spirit tried the hardest, and people talk about it. I mean, even to the extent of I get people all the time telling me, "Oh, my boyfriend or my girlfriend, it's a soulmate." Well, and it probably is, and it's and it's a real term. But you get kids, not there's anything wrong with kids, but you get youngsters who really don't have any idea what that means. Talk about it in their everyday language, and I love it, and it's so it's so nice that it's incorporated now so much more. It's almost they're talking our language, but without even realizing that they're doing it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does absolutely, and there's this work, the any way you want to call it, the spiritual work, the holistic work, that is a wonderful time we're in now. There's so much of it where we talked
Mhm.
about at the beginning when you mentioned physical mediumship. People were in cellars and above shops and things
Oh
like
yeah,
that. And they'd have a little hidey holes and it'd almost carry a little bit of shame. And now we're living in this time where it's very open, and people who do this kind of work will talk very openly about it with other people,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so it's wonderful in that sense, and just seems just a natural way. Things are just happening that way naturally.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in the future, eventually, that will become more and more. So it'll become more mainstream, and people will then just expect that there's certain people that can do that connection with the spirit world, or and I think even more, it's happening already. That sort of evolution of it and that sort of moving forward, and I think that then the work that we do will become even more expected and become quite mainstream eventually.
And the other thing interesting, well, I find it interesting, is now so many people, what would consider quite significant figures in this country and other countries, it
Oh
comes
yeah.
out that they've had a lot of spiritual counsel
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely,
over the
absolutely.
years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Churchill and people like that. A lot of members of the royal family,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and that this is all coming to the forefront now, where
yeah.
they've gone for some
But
sort of
well,
spiritual guidance.
absolutely. And this is a measure, right, of how advanced that has become, right? I met somebody who I met him at well, I won't say when I met him, but I met him at a spiritual event somewhere. And and he was a fascinating sort of guy, right? And he was a professional full-time medium, right? And I said, what do you do? Because he travelled all over the place, and I won't mention the company, but he worked for a very, very well-known Japanese camera company, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, you know the one. It's yeah, right. Yeah, the old one. Yeah, he worked for
yeah.
them, right? And the Instamatic one, them. Yeah, he worked for that company, and he's employed, right, on the board of directors. He's not a director, but he's employed on the board of he goes with the board of directors, right? And he goes to meetings, and they will ask his guidance on contracts, and but just from a sort of spiritual, intuitive kind of guidance that they want, a spiritual input into it, and they'll even do it of whether that somebody should be a business partner. And so I said to them, this is genuinely true. And so I said, well, do they listen to what you say? I mean, would they make a decision on what you say? And they said, yeah, I have the most important say. If
Wow.
they're looking to acquire assets or looking to employ some, go into partnership with someone, things like that, they will ask him, and he'll sit there and then he'll give his opinion. I said, well, that's an incredible job. And it was an incredible job. job, and he gets paid very well paid for it. But it's
What
remarkable.
comes to mind a lot with that, Rob, as well, is actually mediums where they've worked with the police before as well.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a similar sort of thing, and that's become slightly more accepted as well, hasn't it? It's I mean, by virtue of the police will try and contact mediums and things sometimes for that type of thing. Have you ever had an experience like that where you've found something or anything like that?
I've never had a experience where I've been asked or I've found something, but I have been on sites where occurrences have happened where you
Yes.
felt the energy of like a past energy that's
Yes.
there still of something that's occurred on that land and such.
Yeah. I'm similar. I haven't had something directly say where the police have asked me specifically for something, but I have had quite a number of families contact me saying, our son's missing and things like that. Independent of the police, they've contacted us. I've had a few times where can we give any suggestions or guidance or that type of thing where somebody's gone missing from the family or something like that. So I have had that a few times. But the point being with all that is it is so much more accepted. It's I mean, the police being an organisation that's can be very sort of set in their ways in some respects, and so for them to sort of incorporate it and to understand it is quite really significant, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's just opening up now is, as I said before, it's a wonderful time in the sense there's, if I speak to somebody who really wants to get more involved in some kind of work with spirit, I said, well, there's so much. Don't anchor yourself to one thing
Yeah,
because there's so
absolutely.
much at the minute. Dip your toe in different areas. Have as many experiences as you can, and see what suits you and what doesn't suit you.
Yeah, 100%. And I would really recommend people do this. There's so many people who, and I'm sure have come across this, where they almost spend their whole life searching. They feel slightly discontent, or they feel that there's more to life, and they're sort of searching. And I almost say it as if they're trying to find themselves. And sometimes if there's enemies listening and it feels this way, sometimes the only way to try and get through to what it is that will give you that contentment is to dip your toe in and to try different things and see what suits you and see what resonates with you, and that will be the route through to finding that contentment. But some people unfortunately will go their whole lives and never achieve it. And then other people very lucky, they're on that sort of path already, and they are very sort of content people. So you have got the two versions really.
Yeah, and I think that's something that certainly I've realised, and I try to talk to others about, is when we have experiences that are not so good, that they're great teachers as well. They're showing us what we don't like, what doesn't resonate with us, so we can recognise it, and that's all right. That's all right. We put so much pressure on ourselves, don't we, Rob?
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
And just to touch on something that we've talked about before, it is very important. Is this thing about the value of times when we're not doing anything? We put huge pressure on ourselves. Sometimes the pressure is relentless, and even the pressure to achieve something every day and feel that we're doing something every day, and that can occupy our thoughts from the minute we get up to the minute we go to bed. And we put these sorts of pressures on us, and if I hear people saying, oh, I didn't get anything done today, or I had a terrible day, and I had all these plans, didn't do anything. But actually the time of not doing anything, and that time of self is equally important to all the things you achieve. It's so important, but we've got that almost kind of work ethic where we feel we've got to be achieving something every day.
Yeah, and we were talking about it a little bit on I guess we could call it like the pre-show.
Yes, we were.
About we've both experienced that, and really it isn't exclusive just to the working as a medium. This could be whatever you do. We can find ourselves in that cycle of just continuing on and not stepping off that wheel, and it's so important to to take a step back, to allow ourselves to breathe, allow our bodies to breathe, and actually observe what's going on with ourselves as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's such valuable time, and not to go into that thing of having a regret that we've not done anything that day. The sort of mindset is much more healthy to feel I've had a wonderful day because I've done nothing, and you get some people who do
I like that.
who are able to say that, but that is so valuable. It's such valuable time for us. I think people do this in different ways. I massively, and I know we discussed this before, but I've been through a little phase of re-grounding myself. I was aware that my own energy needed redirecting and re-grounding, and I've massively connected with nature. I've gone out, I've done all my stuff that I love. I've done the tree hugging, I've sat under the stars, I've done all this sort of thing in the roots of trees and different things like this, which I just love, and I just feel, and people have said to me, what did you do yesterday? I said, well, actually, the big thing that I did yesterday was I walked in the park. That was the big thing. And people sort of look at you and say, oh, I wish I could do it. It was a waste of time. Or, and it wasn't. It was so valuable, and so for me, connecting with nature, re-earthing, regrounding, connecting with actually our own planet is massively important for me. That's my fix, but I get that it's different for different people,
Yeah, and I think the connection with nature is really something that I'd really advise and promote to anyone who's feeling overwhelmed, burnt out, any of those feelings, pressured. Take a step back. You're always in charge. And if you live near somewhere, where there's nature, seafront, park, even if it's walking around the block, taking a breath of fresh air can give you just clear perspective. It can clear your head. Sometimes we have a feeling of, well, more is more, but it's not. Intensity doesn't always equal results.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
actually
Yeah.
taking our foot off the pedal.
Yeah, you're quite right. And sometimes, the thoughts of feeling disconnected. So if we sometimes feel disconnected from somebody, right? Sometimes the disconnection is not with that person because it's our perception. Sometimes it's the disconnection with the earth, and we need grounding. And it's our own disconnection with everything, not with the individual person. If that makes sense. Sometimes that's why regrounding sometimes then can heal relationships. And it was a need for us to reground and to reconnect with our own sort of soul in a way.
Yeah, that's so interesting because we discussed a little bit earlier before we started recording about energetic issues in the house, or when we've had requests for that, and really this touches on it the same. Whereas anything going on in our life, look within.
Absolutely,
The answers are within. If we're
yeah,
if we're experiencing something, the first place we should look is to ourselves. How am I
100%.
feeling? What's going on with me? And
Yeah.
it'd be good if you could share your thoughts on that, actually, Rob. When we've had people reach out to us who were saying, this is going on in my house, I'm afraid, is it something bad, something's disturbing me? And quite often that it can be very, very simple, the solution. I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah. It's something that as mediums we get asked to do a fair amount, really, and they call them house clearances or rescues and things like this, right? Where we get contacted where there's been some sort of activity in the house, that people feel is maybe a spiritual activity or a physical thing where pictures are moving or the lights are flickering or cups are flying around the room and things like this. And we get asked, and people, there's a lot of taboo about it, a lot of sort of old wives' tales about all this, and people can get very scared, and they say, oh, the house is possessed and things, and I think it goes into this sort of demonic possession people think of, right? And often it's nothing like that at all. But what I find, and this is just from experience, I would say only about, say, 1 in 10 of these things that I do over the year, where I actually feel the presence of somebody in the spirit world, or I can clairvoyantly connect with them, where there actually is an energy there. When you analyze, because I'll always go there and I'll try and connect and try and see what I feel and see if anybody comes through and stuff. And and occasionally I'll get somebody, and it's as a residual energy that's coming back because they lived in the place or lived in where the ground was, and those types of things. And it's nearly always kind of benevolent, or the person's a bit confused in the spirit world. That can happen as well, where they are confused about why somebody's in the house and stuff. It's not aggressive, it's just they can't quite understand it, so they keep revisiting. So that can happen, but it's very rare. The majority of people, and the other 9 people out of 10, right, when I analyze it and when I start talking to them, always there's something going on in their lives, some big upheaval, there's some sort of thing which has made them rethink things. And then sometimes it can even be things, relationship problems, or different things which are affecting their own psyche. And you find that the events that are happening and the perception of those events are actually the person there, their own psyche, their own way of seeing these things, and it's not actually a spiritual thing, you know. And then I've even had extremes where people will, you know, they've had a relationship problem, and I've said, oh, you don't really want your partner to be living here with you, and they say, no, I don't actually, you know. And they've developed all these things which are real to them, but they've developed them all to scare the boyfriend away. So, you know, and that's what's actually happened. So a lot of it can be our own psyche with these things, you know, and because they're so well publicized, and people, there's very, very few, it's a bit of a controversial subject, but there's very few things which are, I know there's a balance and stuff, but sort of dark entities that attach to people is incredibly rare. I don't know.
I agree, and certainly not trying to say that doesn't exist, but it is very rare. And I think a lot of it, what I try to sort of pass on is that everything is energy. So, for example, if you're having something, or you've had a bit of a tough time, that energy is going to be in the home, you know, if something's going on in the home. And just really simply breaking things down, you can get to the core very, very quickly. Even it quite often, if it is spirit connected, I find what works 9 times out of 10 is it will just be somebody that just needs moving on, or you need to let them know that. And so I always encourage people in a very, very gentle way, not being angry or anything like that, just saying, look, you're disturbing us, you're keeping us awake at night, you need to move on here, you know, and that talking out loud will work, it will sort it. But quite often I agree with you, Rob, it lies within something going on with the person in the house, and maybe that's a bit of the role that we have to play as well, in being insightful in that sense, and just pointing them in that direction. That's the way I see it. Our role as whatever you want to call us, you know, mediums or such, is to empower that person. To say, here's my experience. I'm going to give you some tools here. Whether you want to use them or not, take them or leave them, it's up to you. But I find when you give people the advisement, they do it, and it improves in the home, that they're so happy, and they're even happier that they've done it themselves, that they've identified it. They're like, yes.
And it's funny how people have a perception, because when something does happen in the house, or where people live and stuff, the perception of it is always incredibly negative. And I had an experience where I went to somebody's house, and the girl says to me, she said, I'm thinking I'm gonna have to move. And she said, it's awful here. She says, there's cups flying around, they're just missing me. There's forks flying out of the cupboards, and you know, I'm thinking it's dangerous here. And there's one room I can't even go in, right? And so I said, okay, let me just see what I can feel here, right? And this was one of the few occasions where there was somebody in the spirit world there, and the male in the spirit world was a very nice person, but he was his daughter had lived in that house, so there was a sort of tenuous connection there, but there was a real spirit energy. So I did exactly what you've just said, and I said, look, you're frightening this person, are you aware of that? And he was mortified in the spirit world. He said, I don't mean to, you know. And then, but the sort of funny part of it, right, in a way, I said it must be obvious to you, because there's cups flying past her head and things like this, right? And he goes, and I'm having this whole conversation with this person in the spirit world, very strong connection. And he said, well, I have been here. He said, but all I've done in the whole time I've been here is I knocked one by mistake. I came with an energy, so he was there in the house. He knocked a cup off, just brushed against it, and it fell onto a cupboard, right? And all that happened, the handle broke off the cup, right? And he was very adamant about this. So I said to the girl, I thought, crikey, I said, listen, and she was real relieved when I said, there is a connection here, and there's nothing to worry about. He's fine, right? And I've told her, I said what you said, you're frightening this person. And the guy was fine about it. He said, oh, I won't do it again. That's fine. So I said, I need you to be honest with me, though, about these cups flying around and these forks flying out of the cupboards and things like that. I said, has it really happened? And she goes, yeah, it did. She said, one of the cups fell and broke the handle, right? So I said, yeah, but did anything else happen? She said, well, no, but isn't that enough? And it was, it was like, okay. It was sort of, and actually the poor guy in the spirit world, that's all he'd done, would have to brush past it, but she'd had me believe, right? They'd been whistling past it, and forks coming out of the cupboard, she said. So I said, what's that about the forks? And she said, oh no, she said, I think that was me. I dropped some forks.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on there. There does tend to be a tendency to think the worst, and maybe that's a little bit of programming from who knows movies and such.
Definitely.
And a question I often ask is, what's happening, and most importantly, how do you feel when it's happening? And often people say, well, actually, I feel all right. Right. So it could be your nan dropping in and saying hello.
Yeah.
And there's like panic stations, or with the person, they might be having they might be opening up the senses to spirit.
Yes.
A little bit more. And
absolutely.
that can be part of it as well. So there's many different facets that aren't just that straightforward or as problematic as they're made out to be.
And also, I've come across situations where I haven't really felt it will be the best thing for that spirit to move on. The spirit's not doing anything, and I've had a conversation where the person said, I said, what's the problem here? And they kept feeling this energy around them, and they were talking about temperature changing in the room, feeling cold and stuff. And I said, oh yeah, there is somebody in spirit here, but they're completely looking after you. It's probably beneficial to have this person here, right? And we sort of agreed to compromise, and the person stayed, and I've never heard from them again. It was fine, So we don't always have to move them on or do anything with them. That relationship was perfectly okay,
Yeah, and everything's very different, but I'm pleased we were able to sort of talk about that. It feels like we've covered some really good subjects in this podcast, as always, with you, Rob.
Thank you.
But sort of, is there anything you sort of want to round things off with? I mean, we talked a lot, I feel, which has been really important about our own health, well-being, and happiness in anything we do.
Yeah. My sort of message to leave in a way is the happiness, the contentment. We've already got it. Don't spend your life waiting for things, and don't put your happiness and I prefer to say contentment. Don't place that on either material things or events happening, because they're short-lived, and with the human nature, we always have something after that. We get the house, but then we want another house, or we want in a different place, and we always it's the way of its progression. It's moving forward. So live part of the time in the here and now, and don't waste the experiences that we're having at this time, because they could be some of the best in our lives, and we're already just thinking about how we get home, or what we're having for tea, or that type of thing, or we work on Monday. I know I've got a friend, and I'm always trying to recondition him, because he doesn't like Friday, right? Because which is a great day of the week, really, Friday, but he doesn't like Friday because he says on Friday I start worrying about Monday. So and I thought, yeah. So hang on, you've missed the whole of the weekend there, and I know that's a bit extreme, right? But I actually have to I said, you're doing it again here, and he is. I mean, he's effectively almost wishing away 2 of his days, probably his best days, So my message is, just to conclude that, is to say, take time to live in the here and now, and you'll be amazed, and look and enjoy those experiences, and enjoy the little tiny things, even if it's isn't it a lovely crisp morning, and doesn't the air feel quite nice as it's cold and crisp? Enjoy that moment. That's an amazing moment, and those types of things. So that's my message.
Yeah, I agree. And I couldn't think of a better message to sort of wrap this podcast up. It's been great talking to you as always, Rob.
Thank you. Yeah,
It's
no,
always great to share, and it always opens my thoughts up as well to things even more
oh
after
no,
we have these conversations.
and
Like
it's
you
so
said, we
good
never
to.
stop learning, do we?
No, absolutely, absolutely not. Now, would it be appropriate to mention the thing we're doing in?
Absolutely. I was just
Yeah,
going to do that, which is myself, Stephen, and Rob. We will be doing a demonstration on the 13th, Thursday, the 13th of March, at a local club near us, a room at the Fleetwood Bowling Club. So it'll be all three of us working throughout the night. We have done it a few times before, and yeah, we had such a wonderful flow. We worked really well together, and tickets are available for that. So we're going to put details wherever you're listening, or please check out that on the Purple Mountain, purplemountain.co.uk, or on Facebook. Additionally, if you want to get in touch with Rob in terms of readings or connections for anything, I'm sure he's happy for you to do so. We will also be doing another demonstration with the three of us later on in the year, but I'm
yeah, yeah,
sure we're going to be doing another podcast before then. We'll
yeah,
have to definitely fit one in before October or whenever it is. But yeah, please join us for that one on the 13th of March. The last one we did, we had a wonderful atmosphere and energy in the room. It just flowed, didn't it, Rob?
Oh, it's lovely. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. Yeah, yeah. Nice venue as well. It's nice. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful room. So yeah, we look forward to that. And just thanks so much again, Rob. Thanks for everybody
Thank
for
you.
listening. And please, on these subjects, have your say as well in the comment sections. Maybe something you've experienced or an experience that you have that you want to share. Please feel free to share it. Hope you found this conversation nourishing. And until we speak again, I'll say goodbye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bless you. Goodbye. Thank you.